All right, today we're jumping into W.E.B. Du Bois's landmark work, Black Reconstruction, to really get under the skin of a small but incredibly powerful class that basically defined the American South before the Civil War. We're talking, of course, about the planters.
Okay, let's start with just one number, 7%. That's it. In 1860, the entire planter class, the people in charge, made up a measly 7% of the South's population. Think about that. A tiny, tiny minority held pretty much all of the power.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did a group that small build and hold onto an empire that ruled over 5 million white people and 4 million enslaved black people? It's a huge question, and the answer, well, it all comes down to how they built their power.
And according to Du Bois, this wasn't just about being rich. No, this was about having a near-total monopoly on everything that mattered: the labor, the land, the capital. What they built looked a whole lot more like a monarchy than it did at democracy. So how exactly did they forge this iron grip? Well, it wasn't some kind of accident. It was all by design. They systematically twisted the South's political and economic systems to serve them and only them. Yeah, you heard that right. The entire system was engineered to shut out the majority. We're talking both black and white populations. It was built from the ground up to make sure the will of the people had almost zero say in who was actually running the show. And one of the most clever and frankly cynical ways they did this was by twisting the 3/5 compromise. Here's how it worked. They counted enslaved people for the purpose of getting more representatives in government. But of course, those enslaved people had zero rights and couldn't vote. So planters in the Black Belt, areas with lots of slaves, got this huge unearned boost in political power. It's like they were voting for themselves and then getting extra votes for all the human beings they owned. And in the process, they sidelined the poor white farmers they were supposed to be representing. And just listen to this quote to see what that actually looked like on the ground. A government officer at the time said that in South Carolina, the entire state was basically run by just 150 to 180 men. I mean, think about that. Democracy was a total facade. An entire state controlled by a group of guys who could all fit in a single large room. Okay, so we've seen how they got the power. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the world they created for themselves. What was life really like for this ruling class once you get past all the myths they spun? You see, the planters worked really hard to create this image of themselves as this cultured, honorable, almost European-style aristocracy. But the reality? Well, as Du Bois lays it out, it was something else entirely. We're talking about a class defined by wild spending, a stubborn refusal to understand the modern world, and a really brutal internal logic. They weren't interested in building or producing things. They were interested in consumption, in living like kings. An essential and often hidden piece of this reality was what Du Bois calls the sexual economy of slavery. And we have to be clear here, this wasn't just a horrific abuse of power, which it absolutely was. It was also a calculated economic strategy. The law set a child's status, free or enslaved, followed the mother. This created a twisted financial incentive for a master to father children with an enslaved woman, because that child became his property. In the border states, this turned into a systematic business of breeding human beings for sale to the Deep South.
And this quote, wow, it's from a woman inside that ruling class, supposedly at the top of the pyramid. She said, "We Southern ladies are complimented with names of wives, but we are only mistresses of seraglios." It's such a bitter, powerful observation. It just captures the deep moral rot at the very heart of the planters' world. This system poisoned everyone it touched, even the women of the ruling class.
So you might be thinking, if they had all this power, they must have been unstoppable, right? Well, no. Their entire empire was built on quicksand. And that's because the whole system was propped up by a fatal economic flaw.
Here's the problem in a nutshell. The planters were trying to run this pre-modern agrarian slave economy in the middle of a rapidly industrializing 19th century world. They wanted the huge incomes, but they didn't want to invest in machinery or modern methods or skilled labor. Their whole economic model was a relic, and they were getting squeezed by industrialists in the North and in Europe who were setting the prices for their crops. Their profits were shrinking, and they were basically trying to swim against the tide of history, and deep down they knew it.
And this economic pressure backed them into a corner. It created this desperate downward spiral. Since they refused to modernize, the only lever they could pull to keep their profits up and maintain their lavish lifestyle was labor. They had to get more for less.
And that meant doubling down, getting even more brutal, more ruthless in the exploitation of enslaved workers. But you can't just do that. You have to justify it to the world and to yourself. So they had to create a powerful ideology to make it all seem natural and right.
And here it is. Here is that justification, stated in the clearest possible terms by the Vice President of the Confederacy himself. He called racial inequality the great truth, and slavery the natural and normal condition. This wasn't just some background prejudice. As Du Bois points out, this was the literal cornerstone of their whole society. It was an ideology they had to build, had to believe in to defend a system that was economically failing and morally indefensible.
So you can see where this is going. This desperate logic, this constant need to expand a failing system, it was driving them straight towards a cliff. It meant that a huge conflict wasn't just possible, it was pretty much inevitable. Their inefficient system was like a hungry beast that always needed more land, more enslaved people to work it. And that put them on a direct collision course with the rest of the country. Every one of these moments, the Fugitive Slave Act, Kansas, Nebraska, all of it, was a desperate attempt to prop up their world. But each move just pushed them one step closer to the very war that would bring it all crashing down.
And this is the final, stunning twist in the story. According to Du Bois's analysis, the planter class was completely and utterly destroyed by the war that they started. I mean, they didn't just lose their power. As a distinct social class, they just vanished. They were wiped out, left broke, and their families eventually just blended in with the poor white population they had looked down on for so long.
And that brings us to the most important point of all. The men themselves, the planters, as a distinct class, they vanished. But the systems they perfected, the methods of economic exploitation and the ideology of racial control, they didn't go anywhere, not at all. That legacy, that cornerstone, would haunt the South and the entire nation for another century and beyond. Which leads us to the final haunting question we're left with.